In this video, we will show you how to replace your front lower control arm bushing on the Chevy Trailblazer. This is part of your front suspension, located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so your wheel's off the ground with the suspension hanging. Once you've done that, we'll continue on to removing the center cover, all 6 of our 19mm lug nuts, and then the wheel. Now that we have the wheel out of the way, we have a clear view of our front sway bar link. You can see that there's a 21mm nut holding this in place to the lower control arm. Let's remove this nut. Now that we have that broken free, the next thing we'll do is continue on with a 21mm wrench here, and we'll use an Allen head socket directly in the center to continue removing that nut. Now that we have that loose, we'll continue with our 21mm wrench right on that nut. We'll use a 7mm Allen head socket directly in the center of this. Slide this out of here, give it a quick inspection. As for ours, the boot came off. You just want to make sure you press that on there so no moisture or debris makes its way in. We'll set that aside for now. Now we can start separating the control arm from the control arm bracket. To do this, we'll be using two 21mm, one to remove the nut and the other to hold the bolt. You need to pay attention to the mounting bolts here. They come through from the rear towards the front. When we go to install these, you want to install them in the exact same position. A little bit of movement from that one. We'll leave this in place for now and continue and do the same to the rear. Here. Now we can start removing each of those bolts. For this rearward one, you just have to slide it underneath the power steering rack. It might be a little bit of a tight fit. Now we can start removing those mounting bolts. Now that we have all that separated, we're going to continue on to this area. Now this bushing has a stud that will come through the lower aspect of the front strut bracket. We have to remove this 24mm nut. Set that aside. Now we can start separating this area. If you find that it's stuck in place, which is what is common, you can continue on with a pickle fork. We'll make our way in between this area, gently separating it. Now that we have that so it started separating, we're going to continue on by putting a little bit of pressure underneath this area, essentially just holding the control arm still for us while we get this out of here. Now we'll take hold of this and gently separate it. Once you have some support under this area, we'll also be using a strap. Now that we have this control arm secured, we're going to continue on by trying to drive this bushing out of the lower control arm. Now when we do this, what we need to do is start rolling this bushing in and away from the control arm itself. As we start rolling it away, once we've done that, we'll start driving it out towards the rear. Now the next thing we'll do is clean and inspect the mounting hole of the control arm. If you find that there's any sort of debris in here that you have to use sandpaper, you want to be extremely careful. By removing too much material from the control arm, that bushing will not sit in place properly. That feels good. Now we're going to continue on by pressing this ball joint into the control arm. We want to make sure that the base area here is completely bottomed out against the control arm. When pressing this in, you never want to press against the center area here because that will cause damage and you're going to have to replace this bushing. At this point, I'll be using a cup. It fits directly over this with a small gap in the bottom for that center area. Now what I'll do is I'll continue giving this a couple taps with a hammer to drive it in position. Looks like we're getting close. Now, as I was tapping this in, I can hear an audible difference between the clunk, 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 and then the bing, 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 once it was actually fully bottomed out. Now I'll just take my finger, come right around this, being careful not to hurt myself, just to ensure that I am completely seated all the way around. We can remove the strap from this area. The next thing we'll do is start putting the control arm into position. As we bring it up, we want to pay attention to three different things. We have the center bushing that will go through that lower shock mount. We also have our control arm bushings. We have one along the back and one along the front. We want to make sure the control arm aligns with all three of these areas. Remove the support from under here. Hardest part's just getting everything aligned at the same time. All right, we've got that started in there. Continue over here. Let's get this aligned. Now we can start putting in our bolts. Start with a rearward mounting bolt. This comes through from the rear towards the front, and then we'll start on our mounting nut. Have to tap this in. Start this nut on here. If you want to use some thread locker, we'll call it your prerogative. Before you tighten that, we've got our front bolt. Now that we started in those mounting bolts over there, we'll continue into the center here. We want to make sure that we tighten this, torque it to 82 foot-pounds. Let's apply some pressure underneath this lower control arm. We need to bring this up into the original ride height position, and then we can continue on by tightening those 2 control arm bolts. Back over at those control arm bolts, we'll be using 2 21 millimeters. We'll hold the bolt side, tighten the nut. Put this one right here. And now we'll torque each of these to 96 foot-pounds. Release pressure from under your lower control arm, and we'll continue on to that sway bar link. We can get the nut on here. Continue tightening that nut, and then we'll torque it to 17 foot-pounds. If you find that the stud of the sway bar link spins while you're trying to tighten it, just continue using your 7 millimeter to hold that stud still. Now we can install our wheel. Start on all 6 of your 19 millimeter lug nuts. We'll bottom these out, get the wheel back on the ground, and we can torque these to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. If you have a center cover, you can put that on now. Have a look along the back side. You'll find that you have a small diagram of a valve stem. This is the valve stem on your wheel. We'll align this area and tap it into place. Okay, friend, we've got our vehicle back together. At this point, take it for a road test, listen for funny noises, and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.